Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, a lot of the USC fans know this as well. I've been a defender of Lincoln Riley. I've been a defender of quarterback Miller Moss. I'm not sure if I'm there sitting here Sunday morning anymore. There's so many notes that I have in my notebook that I kind of just want to get off my chest until you kind of know this better than anybody. We talk a lot about USC football. And so, in turn, I've kind of become a little bit of a USC fan. I'm living and dying with USC a little bit on my Saturdays. It's been really frustrating. And I think it's so obvious that change needs to happen within this USC program. I want to start with the conversation of Lincoln Riley, but I also want to have the conversation at quarterback as well. Two conversations that, we've had over the last couple of weeks, but I've always kind of consistently been like, give Lincoln Riley some time to figure it out. I think Miller Moss is your guy at quarterback. I'll tell you what, to start, like, I'm not there anymore. And so before we get into this, to the USC fans, I know it's frustrating. We're Michigan fans, so USC, Michigan, we kind of in the same spot here. Let it fly in the comment section. There's so many takes that you can have, and I think so many takes have so much merit. So would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The USC fans continue to show the boys a ton of love, even though it's been a rocky 2024. We appreciate you guys. And then more importantly, Dill, we're going to have this conversation a lot over the next couple of weeks and months for USC. So let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's start at the top. Like, anytime you lose to a football team like Maryland, who just got routed at home by Northwestern last week, that falls right into the lap of the head coach, and that's Lincoln Riley. I want to start with this conversation, Dill. I know historically Lincoln Riley has been one of the best play callers that we've seen in the sport of college football for the last 5 to 10 years. That being said, is it a time for a change with Lincoln Riley calling the plays as the head coach? Because you look at this USC team and the lack of, kind of game and situational awareness that we've seen from this team in the third and fourth quarters of these football games. To me, it seems like you have a head coach that has his head buried in the playbook, doesn't really know the situation around him all that often. And I think that's part of the reason you're seeing USC wilt away in the fourth quarter. You see a lot of head coaches kind of go through this. Like Ryan Day is a really good example. Elite play caller, was calling the plays for Ohio State, and all of a sudden he kind of kept losing those close games and said, all right, I gotta kind of get my head out of the playbook and coach this team as a head football coach. I think Kirby Smart's another good example. I think Dan Lanning's another good example. Some of the best minds on their sides of the football, they're not calling the plays because they got to be a head coach of a football program. And Dill, I feel like that's where Lincoln Riley is kind of sitting with this USC team right here.
And he's also like not hiring real offensive coordinators. Like at the end of the day,
Oh,
he's so much that like you look, Dan Lanning hiring Tosh Lupoy, that's a real defensive coordinator. Ryan Day hiring Chip Kelly, that's a real offensive coordinator. They're not putting like guys who are so clearly beneath them, if you will, as coaches at that kind of ball or play calling
I
spot.
think that's intentional because I think Lincoln Riley wants to call the plays.
And
And
that
I think,
stinks. Like that's gross. You got to
and
have
And at the end of the day, and this is not me getting up here and saying Lincoln Riley shouldn't have his hands all over the offense, because he should. Like, he should be involved in game planning. And even in the game, like, he should be involved in terms of, hey, how do we want to script this football game? But I think you see USC, you see how they manage football games late in the fourth quarter. They're just not doing a very good job of that. And I think that has so much to do with your head coach, who's supposed to be involved in time management and game management, just having his face in the play sheet and just not really sure what's going on around him. I think
the
that's
tough
a really
part
big.
about taking him out of the play calling duties is you've now seen a couple of games right out the gates. They're coming out storming like that Penn State game. I mean, he was really scheming it up. He had that team really, really rolling. But then you like what you kind of said, the frustrating parts are, well, why into the third and fourth quarter they stop running the football? It's like, well, you're leading these teams, you have these games not in hand, but you're in control of the games. And then the run game shuts down and Miller Moss throws picks late in these games. It's that to me is what's getting frustrating is like, again, on the one hand, he is an elite play caller. There's no doubt about that. When he's rolling and when he's got that offense kind of humming, there's not like an offense that runs kind of more pretty, if you will. But again, like when you're in the fourth quarter and you stop running the ball for whatever reason, I don't know if that's him kind of losing track of where he is or whatever, but like there is some disconnect because their inability to run the ball late in the game, it's not inability, but lack of willingness to do it is beyond frustrating, I think.
Yeah, so two things that come to my mind. One, he can still be involved in scripting the offense, and quite frankly, we've seen some really bad first halves from USC in this season as well. But like, if you're the head coach, like you can still script plays. You can still have long meetings with your play call and say, "This is how we want to call the game in the first quarter." You can still do all that, and I think be pretty dang effective. But you're not the guy that's responsible every single snap for getting the play in. That's kind of where I stand with that. I think secondly, and you hit the nail on the head, the and this falls on Lincoln Riley too. And this kind of frustrates me when you don't have the ability to coach to your roster and coach to your strengths. That's a problem. We've seen a lot of good head coaches that just haven't been able to adjust to the roster and talent that they have. Jimbo Fisher's a perfect example. Like he had an offense with Jameis Winston at Florida State that was elite. That's one of the better college football teams that we've seen in a very long time. Goes to Texas A&M, wants to treat that Texas A&M program just like he treated Florida State. It obviously didn't work. I look at Lincoln Riley. The USC is an incredible stat. 5.4 yards per carry. That is 18th in the country. Yards per carry, effectiveness running the football. This is one of the best offenses that you see in the country. Now, the problem is they're running the football only 38% of their snaps. That's 130. That's almost dead last. Name me another offense that is running the football as well as USC is, but not sticking to the run game. And again, you talk about managing a football game when you have a lead in the second half, in the fourth quarter, and you're not sticking to the run game. You're not trying to salt games away. I'm not telling you to play scared, but I'm telling you to coach to your offense. It's clear that this USC offense, the offensive line, significantly better blocking in the run than they are in pass protection. To have that big of a discrepancy where you're so good at running the football, but you refuse to do it, that tells me Lincoln Riley can't adjust to the talent on this roster.
And
Yeah,
I am
when you have
super tempted to dig into that and see where those runs are called because, like, just my feel of these games is in the third and fourth quarter, they're not running the ball basically at all. In that part, again, when they're taking leads against these teams into those quarters and they stop running it, and then teams get to pin their ears back and start getting after that offensive line, which clearly has some real problems at the tackle spot and frankly at the guard spot as well with Alani Noah. It's really, really annoying that they can't why like you have to run the ball in those situations and they're not, and it's causing turnovers, it's causing late leads to kind of evaporate, and that falls squarely on him. There's no one else who's going to take a bullet for that.
Kirby Smart says this all the time. Like, why do you run the football? You run the football to play complementary football with their defense, but more importantly, to slow edge rushers down, to slow a pass rush down. They can't just pin the ears back and get upfield and get after the passer if you're consistently running the football. USC knows they have a pass protection problem, and they refuse to stick to the run game. Again, I feel crazy like criticizing one of the brightest offensive minds that we see in the country, but it's a problem for Lincoln Riley and USC. Now, I think the second there's so many conversations where it's like they're really bad signs for Lincoln Riley. I think the second is like winning culture, like losing to teams that you are grossly more talented in, and you're gonna get people that say, "Yeah, all right, injuries, Eric Gentry out, Anthony Lucas out." I get USC has had a couple of injuries. That is part of the football. Name me a very good college football team that is perfectly healthy going into the month of November. You can't. That's just how college football works. There's two things that come to mind. One, winning culture. Like this team just knowing they can put teams away in the second half. That is 100% clearly not there. And I think secondly, and most important, the roster construction of this team. Why are they wilting away in the fourth quarter? This roster is not constructed good enough. Like this is not a roster that we expect to see at USC. They haven't recruited the high school ranks well enough at the positions that are important. Trenches, line of scrimmage play. Yeah, you bring in some five-star quarterbacks. You bring in some really talented wide receivers. But you look at the offensive line and defensive line. One, I don't think it's supremely talented. Name me a first or second round draft pick on either side of the offensive or defensive line. Maybe a guy like Jonah. But outside of that, the depth is a massive problem too. And we know how important that is, especially winning in the Big Ten. This is year 3 for Lincoln Riley, and the depth along the lines of scrimmage is still really, really bad. From a roster construction standpoint, look, there's a lot of problems in game for USC and Lincoln Riley as a head coach. I think there's even more problems in terms of how you are going about building this roster. And I think it's resulting in this team fading away in a meaningful way in the second half of these football games.
And that's frankly where it's going to get tough to defend because even I'm still like a grass isn't always greener guy. I still think Lincoln Riley's a good coach, but this type of loss is inexcusable. I mean, it
Yeah.
just like Maryland's really, really bad. I don't care what that 4-3 record says. We've watched them play enough games. They are not a good football team. And to lose this type of game, like that's where you get like this isn't year one. If that happens year one, fine, whatever. Like, yeah, he had to turn the roster over. But I think you kind of said it. I mean, you're not looking at guys developing up through this program at a high enough level. And at certain spots, yeah, maybe their wide receivers developing really well, quarterback play. Well, maybe I don't even know if I'm going to say that right now. He's obviously done a good job. His track record says it's really good, but Miller Moss late in these games is not playing good enough. But you just look across the board, like they're not developing recruits from freshmen to their junior years
No.
to go into the NFL draft. And that's where I think you really start to get concerning. And again, like into this year, I was like, oh, you're starting to see them play better. But now these last few games, I think that confidence is kind of waning a little bit. Again, you can't just live off that LSU game forever
And
because you're seeing these late game
I
collapses.
think they've made like, and why I defended Lincoln Riley, I believe it was Wednesday afternoon, was I think he crushed the defensive coaching staff. And I get they gave up 429 yards of total offense, but you're seeing the development take place. Like guy like Devin Tompkins, Kobe, these guys were like unplayable last year, and all of a sudden like are playing pretty good football. So you look at the defensive side of the football and say, I think they got that right. Now it's unfortunate you wasted one of the best quarterbacks we've seen play in college football, but you finally got that right. Dill, one of the conversations that I was kind of thinking of is like, all right, Lincoln Riley might be a good coach. Is he a good coach in the Big Ten? I don't know. Like you can tell he's been a guy that grew up in the Big 12, not really playing trenches football, kind of just playing in those shootouts. Who can score more points? Lincoln Riley's great at that. But you want a team that can just score as many points against another really good offense but bad defense. Lincoln Riley's one of the better coaches that you can hire in the country. One of the questions is Lincoln Riley the right guy to be a head coach of USC playing in the Big Ten? That's a little bit of a question there. Let's get to the next conversation, and that is Miller versus Jayden. And again, I've been kind of defending Miller, and I do still think like you see some good things from Miller. His ability to attack zone in the middle of the field, it's some next level stuff. Like there's some really impressive stuff from Miller Moss. Now, the biggest thing for me is the lack of mobility, and there's definitely a cap on the arm talent. It's becoming a little bit of a problem. And I think most importantly, the mobility. And I've seen a lot of people say this on Twitter, and I really do agree. Dill, look across the college football landscape. There's not many really good quarterbacks that can extend plays outside of the pocket. Because you look at the reality of college football, like the defensive line is probably going to have their way with the offensive line in a lot of different games. So you need a quarterback that can extend plays, keep their eyes downfield, and be a little bit of a playmaker, kind of like Caleb Williams was. And we don't need a guy like that because that was some special stuff, but you need a quarterback that has some sort of athleticism to get outside the pocket and go make some plays. When Miller Moss is kept clean, the numbers are nuts. It's like an 80% completion percentage. He's pushing the ball down the field. But I think the reality of college football, and especially for this USC team, is you're not kept clean that often. You have to be a playmaker at the quarterback position. Miller Moss doesn't seem to be that. I think we all know Jayden Maiava can be that. Um, and I think the more important conversation, Dill, is look, this team's not going to the college football playoffs. You got to figure out if Jayden Maiava is the guy in 2025. How are you going to know if he's the guy if he doesn't get any opportunity late in this 2024 season? If there's one argument for me that maybe it's time for a switch at quarterback, it's kind of two things. One, look, winning football games, that's a quarterback stat, and USC's not doing that. As much as I love Miller Moss as a Trojan, and you guys know I love Miller Moss going back to the offseason, this team's sitting at 3-4 with some inexcusable losses. And I think secondly, like if you're USC, not you're looking at 2025. And I think you got to figure out if Jayden Maiava is going to be the guy in 2025. And if you want to do that, you got to get him on the football field. I would like to see Jayden coming up these next couple of weeks here.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I still look and like if you ask me who gives them a better chance right now, it still feels like Miller Moss again. That's who they kind of picked in the offseason. He's
Yeah.
still playing well. I don't put these losses on him. Again, I think there's a lot more going on around him. I think some of the late game play calling, late game defense melting down a little bit, like those type of things seem like the more important issues, if you will, to me. Like, again, I look at that Miller Moss stat line, like, you should be winning these football games when you go 34 for 50 for 336 yards in 3 touchdowns. Like, that's good enough ball. I know wide receivers are making plays. I know that's what you're going to say. I
Well,
still
no,
think
it's what. Sorry, it's my fault. My fault. What I was gonna say is, how do you know Miller Moss gives you a better shot? Like I don't think we do know that. Like Jayden Maiava as a redshirt freshman on a UNLV team last year was, yeah, it was a little bit of a roller coaster. There's no denying that. But the highs, they're higher than what we've seen from Miller Moss. And like, what does it look like now with all this time developing under Lincoln Riley? How do we know that Miller Moss gives USC a better chance to win football games
Well, I
than
don't
even
know, but
Jay Maiava?
that's what Lincoln Riley concluded. And again, I think
Yeah,
now we're
that's fair.
on top. Miller Moss has now probably lost in 2 games with poor play down the stretch. Like that
Yes.
pick on Zachariah Branch, I know it maybe wasn't the best route. That's not competitive. Like that's just throwing the
Yeah.
ball up and getting scared in the moment, not being able to make a play. You can't have that happen. In Penn State, really, really poor performance down the stretch from him in that game. So again, like now, whether like down in, down out, he's the better quarterback. Now I don't think that I think now, like, you can kind of go that argument of, well, now we got to look to the future. And, like, we don't want this log jam where Miller Moss is not going to the NFL after this year. You have 2 talented guys coming up through the pipeline with Jayden Maiava and then obviously Julian Lewis. If Miller Moss starts another year, one of those guys, very good chance they leave. I think that now Lincoln probably does need to start looking at that kind of structure the quarterback room, if you will, not blow that. Like again, like I think of a Cade McNamara with JJ McCarthy at Michigan. It's like, yeah, Cade maybe is safer and he maybe doesn't make mistakes, so maybe you keep him in. But at some point, you can't have really, really talented players sitting behind guys who I don't know that are capable of
Yeah, and I
winning.
think at the end of the day, like, how do you get Jayden Maiava to reach his ceiling? Let him play. Let him make some mistakes. Like Miller Moss is making mistakes, but Jayden has inevitably a higher ceiling to run this USC offense, especially with how it's constructed. And one other thing that just came up to my mind, I don't get why Miller Moss is choosing Zachariah Branch to throw the football up to. Like, yeah, I'm for throwing the football up to guys like Deuce and Jacoby. We've seen multiple times, like, oh, I'm just going to give Zachariah Branch a 50-50 ball there. That's not the guy you want to be throwing those 50-50s to. I wouldn't hate seeing Jayden. At the end of the day, it's just like, what do you have? What do you have so you know in 2025, like, do we need to make sure Julian Lewis is ready to start as a true freshman, or do we have Jayden for a year? And it sucks because I love Miller, and I think he's like, and I know a lot of the fans love Miller, but at the end of the day, I think if you're Lincoln Riley, you got to figure out what you have in 2025, and the only way to figure that out is giving Jayden an opportunity. And I think he can do some things for this USC offense that Miller Moss is just quite frankly not capable of doing. Let it fly in the comment section. And we're going to talk about this a lot over the next couple of weeks and over the next couple of days. Would love to hear from the USC fans. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.